Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for having me. It's my first time here in Kosovo. It's beautiful. Really excited to be here. I'm on the San Francisco time zone, so right now it's like 11 a.m., I think, so I'm awake. So that's good to know. So a lot of my work, as Vlad had said, has focused on the open internet and decentralized technology. And we've heard a lot already about the future. But sometimes to learn about the future, we need to look to the past. So the year now, 2015, 20 years ago, 1995, was the year that the internet really started to take off massively. Cyberspace became a really big thing, cover of Time magazine over here. And what we saw was that the web emerged as a decentralized network. Tim Berners-Lee, the creator of the World Wide Web in the early 90s, created it so that anybody could put up a server and anybody could create a website and put it online. Over in the US, we had other networks called Prodigy, AOL, CompuServe. Was anybody on one of those? Old school networks? They were centralized networks and they were controlled from the top down. And in the end, it was the World Wide Web and its decentralized nature that won out against those proprietary networks. So here we have the animated GIF, welcome to the internet. 1995, along with the early day of the internet, was also the year, by the way, that the movie Hackers came out. 20-year anniversary, Hack the Planet. Who's seen the movie? Okay, so some friends of mine and I, 5 years ago in New York, threw a 15th anniversary party for Hackers the movie. I think we're going to do a 20th, and we encourage everyone else to throw related parties. Also, really good soundtrack for that movie, got me into electronic music. So then came the OOs, the noughts, the 2000s. I don't even know what to call it still today. We don't have a good word for it. And the concept of the cloud emerged, right? And here's this really cheesy photo of a laptop with clouds behind it. And the idea was, it's okay, you don't have to have a decentralized network. You don't have to put up your own server. You can just put it in the cloud. And it was like, what is this cloud thing? We don't even know, but we'll just spin up a server on Heroku or AWS and kind of upload all our information to Dropbox. And that'll be A-okay, right? What also emerged was the idea, the concept of walled gardens. So we had a network like Facebook, actually resembles AOL a lot. Did anybody here have an AOL profile back in the day? Maybe people from the US? I had all sorts of information about me, and it seems a lot like Facebook is today. And so the idea of these walled gardens was there's one centralized entity run by, say, a big company like Facebook that controls everything. So let's say you don't use your real name because you're a human rights activist and your government might come and crack down on you. Well, Facebook actually says you need to use your real name. Let's say you were, say, a victim of a crime and you don't want to be public about your identity. Well, Facebook is the one that's in control. It can take down whatever it wants. In the US, we have the First Amendment, but private companies are not subject to it. So effectively, Facebook is the arbiter and is able to control this. So that's always not so good, as I'm sure a lot of people have experienced when it comes to this idea of centralization and walled gardens. Luckily, lately, people have come to a realization about this concept of the cloud that actually it doesn't exist. A cloud is just someone else's computer. And when people think, oh, I'll just put it up there, well, that computer can still be accessed. Governments can come and, say, take stuff from those computers, and it can cause a whole lot of problems. So in the OOs, we also had this concept of the P2P war. It was the copyright wars back in the day. I'm sure we'll hear a lot about that later on from Peter over here. But part of what emerged from this was a new kind of decentralized technology that enabled users to send files to each other in a peer-to-peer or distributed fashion. For example, BitTorrent as a technology emerged. And what was so cool about BitTorrent, by the way, if you notice, you have Alice with John, Paul, George, and Ringo, the Beatles. I don't think they really might have been so happy about BitTorrent. But it enabled individuals to cut up pieces of files and then send it to each other in a much more distributed fashion. You had the more central nodes for trackers, but there's even some technology that can get around that these days. But unfortunately, and especially in the US, but elsewhere around the world, there was a war that emerged from the movie and music industries. And they decided that they were not happy about this technology. They were going to shut it down. In fact, though, Bram Cohen, the creator of BitTorrent, told me just a few days ago that he didn't even envision that BitTorrent would be used for movies. He just thought it would be used to move large files. And Bram was the kind of guy who doesn't really lie. He's not actually very good at lying. By the way, when you Google Bram, look who shows up over here. This is Peter. Hi, Peter. So what happened in the end was that we didn't see the development of other technologies, or there was this kind of public PR war against the development of decentralized technologies. And I even think we might have seen more, say, academics or students or researchers pursuing it to a greater degree had that not happened. So then enter the year 2008. Along comes some individual or group of individuals we still do not know, named Satoshi Nakamoto. By the way, this is not actually Satoshi Nakamoto. Time magazine last year wrote a piece saying that this guy was Satoshi Nakamoto. His real name is Dorian Nakamoto, but I think Satoshi is actually his first name, but his middle name's Dorian. He goes by Dorian. They apparently created this entire story. It was totally not true. They still stand by it, but this guy's not actually Satoshi. Anyway, he's become a bit of a symbol. So someone named, or people named Satoshi Nakamoto wrote a paper called Bitcoin, an open source peer-to-peer currency that announced this technology to the world. It was what else happened in 2008? That was a big economic and financial thing. What? Yeah, financial crisis, exactly. So a lot of us believe that this actually was released at the time and was even spurred on by what happened in the economic sector around the financial crisis. I, at the time, was very interested in Diaspora, was an advisor to that project. Diaspora was a distributed open source central network created by some students at MIT, NYU, and open source enthusiasts. And I'd generally been interested in how can you decentralize, say, walled gardens like Facebook or other things. So when I first heard about Bitcoin, and this was in 2010, I said, oh, cool, an open source currency, it's peer-to-peer. Oh, wait, it will never work. And I think a lot of people, when they first heard about it, had similar thoughts. But actually, a few years later, in 2011, by the way, Bitcoin kind of became a bit more of a big deal. That was the year that an infamous marketplace came out called the Silk Road, and it got a lot of press because it turned out you could use this currency to buy drugs on the internet. And that was one of the very early uses. But it got a lot of press, and a lot of technologists discovered it and thought, hey, this could actually be something. This is really cool. So Bitcoin actually is two things when we say the word Bitcoin. And it's a little confusing because you're never exactly sure which one people are talking about. So the first is a protocol. And here's a really complicated map that you can Google this if you want to see it. But broadly speaking, Bitcoin runs a network. And this network has something called a blockchain. Who here knows what a blockchain is? Raise your hand. OK, not that many, so I can explain it. A blockchain is a record of transactions. And what it does is there are blocks. And in each block, there will be several transactions. And there's an entire network of what are called miners. And these miners nowadays are people or companies that are running hardware. They're ASICs, so they're dedicated just to mining Bitcoin. They're solving math problems, basically, in order to verify the transactions and run the network. And one of the big things that Bitcoin solved, and this is called, related to what's called the Byzantine generals problem, you can Google it, was the idea of double spending. And the idea that, let's say I have €1 here, and I spend it to buy some pizza, but I want to then go use the same euro there. Well, if I have a physical euro, I can't do that. But if it's digital, theoretically, someone could just spend it again. So Bitcoin was able to solve that. It uses public-private key cryptography. And broadly speaking, this blockchain can not only be used for, say, sending currency, but all sorts of other uses. So this is the protocol aspect of Bitcoin. And what you have by the blockchain technology is distributed authenticity. So you know that your transaction is valid. And there are lots of people around the world that are ensuring that it's valid. And there's no one entity, much like, say, a bank or a central national system of finance, that would say this is the only valid transaction. So it's distributed around the world. So Bitcoin is also a currency, or a token as we call it. A lot of people have heard about the currency part. You can kind of use it apparently to buy drugs, not so much anymore, but for quite a lot of other things too. What's really interesting about this currency and token is that it's used to incentivize people to run the network. So every time a miner, say, mines a Bitcoin, as it's called, they receive currently 25 Bitcoin in order to do so. So the system is actually paying out money or currency to the people that are running the network. And then, as a result, this gets them to keep the network up. So one thing that's really cool about Bitcoin is it's an exercise in incentives. It's a really cool technological feat involving cryptography, but it's also an economic feat around incentives. So here are some Bitcoin cookies. Apparently there are no private keys in this Bitcoin, in the cookies. In order to send Bitcoin, though, you have your public key, which is a long address that is a hash, actually, of your public key, that you can send to anybody, and that's perfectly fine for anyone to send, and then a private key that you should not ever tell anybody, because if you do, they can steal your Bitcoin, so you don't want to do that. Lately, there's been a lot of talk around Bitcoin and blockchain technology saying, oh, well, we hate Bitcoin, but we really like the blockchain technology thing. And what people fail to realize regarding this network is if you don't have the incentive for a distributed and decentralized network, you may not have the network at all. So there's this somewhat misunderstanding around, like, let's just use a blockchain and we'll forget about Bitcoin. So one of the things that got me really excited about this technology is we finally have the possibility to have an internet of value. In the 90s, I could send an email to anyone around the world, and that was actually pretty cool. I remember being really excited when on 95, by the way, I first got on the internet, could send a message to anybody. And sure, you could send a telegram in the past, but like, it was kind of hard, and it was certainly not the same thing. What this technology can do is it can be a protocol for anybody to send anything of value, be it Bitcoin or lots of other things, nearly instantly or instantly around the world. Back in the early days of the internet, actually, the crafters of HTTP, the internet standard, had a protocol, an error message that was 402. So you guys have seen 404, right? 404 is not found. So there was an error message 402, payment required. It actually was never used back then. It was reserved for future use. And the idea being, okay, at one point we'll have a distributed, decentralized, open protocol for payments, and we can do that, and now we finally have this opportunity. But this technology can do a lot of other things as well. For example, in the realm of privacy and identity, I don't know about here in Europe, but in the US, we've had a data breach a day, basically. Like, are there data breaches happening here too? People's personal data is compromised? Yes. Most recently, the major federal office in the US, Office of Personnel Management, with the data on all the people that have the security clearance in the US, all the information was compromised. So when you have the storage of personal data in one place, it makes it quite easy for somebody to break in and then compromise all that data. So now, basically, everybody in the US, and possibly in a lot of other places around the world, will have to get identity monitoring kind of insurance, where because their personal identity has been compromised so much, they can have their identity stolen at almost any time. And I have some friends that have had this happen, and it is extremely hard to then fix your identity being stolen. So why is it that we're storing all this personal data in a centralized place? There are early efforts around blockchain technology. Here you see One Name. It's a website dealing with identity, where individuals can verify themselves, post their identity. It is then put in a blockchain, actually technically the Namecoin blockchain here, not the Bitcoin blockchain. It's a similar technology that then verifies one's identity. So the idea moving forward in the future would be that then when I log in to, say, a banking website or an online shopping website, they don't have to store my information for either payment or about myself. I keep it locally, and it can authenticate with their server using a blockchain to ensure that it is the right information. So this kind of technology could mean that we no longer have these massive breaches of personal data that have been plaguing a lot of things lately. So next, we have this concept of smart contracts. I actually have a background in law. I studied law and technology. And this word, I was speaking at a conference a few months ago with a bunch of lawyers. It makes lawyers sound dumb, right? It's like, you guys are not, you're not good at contracts. We'll just do these automated smart contracts. But broadly speaking, what can be done here is that you can automate all sorts of kind of low value or small contracts. We can smart contractify all the things and hold, say, either digital currency like Bitcoin or an asset in escrow, where you can either have a trusted third party or some other way to, say, verify whether somebody fulfilled the contract. So basically, when it comes to even things like wills or selling property, by the way, there are even some folks that have put their marriage on the Bitcoin blockchain. I find this a little strange because if you didn't know that you're already married, you really need Bitcoin and their blockchain to tell you you're married. But all of this is happening, and smart contract technology can enable small value transactions and contracts that a lawyer could never even dream of doing, or nobody could afford to pay a lawyer to do. Next up, we have the concept of micropayments, or even payments more broadly. A lot of people say, oh, well, in the future, everybody will use one global Bitcoin currency. I'm not so sure that will be the case, say, like if my parents will be using Bitcoin in 20 or 30 years. But what it will be used for, or similar technology, is as a protocol to exchange payments or value. For example, here with credit cards, right? Here in Europe, you guys have a smarter system with at least chip and PIN, but that usually doesn't work on the internet. In the US, we actually just got signature and PIN, but you still have to sign, which doesn't really make much sense to us, or to me at least. But part of the problem with this old technology is your public key is your private key. So every time somebody sees this card, and they can kind of Google some information about you, they can steal it, right? So we see in the US, for example, a massive amount of credit card fraud. It's a little bit lower here, but it's a system that is terribly insecure. So part of what this technology can do is it can make it such that you don't ever have fraud in any meaningful way. Bitcoin, at least in its current state, also does not allow chargebacks. So if you charge something on a credit card and it's fraudulent, the consumer can just say, nope, didn't do it. And then the merchant suffers as a result, and this actually hurts a lot of people that accept credit cards. Bitcoin does not allow for that, and that's an advantage. There may be some systems eventually that will allow for some arbitration or mediation. There's also a really cool concept around micropayments and tipping. Here is the Doge. This is Dogecoin. It was a really interesting experiment in digital currency centered around a meme where a lot of people on the internet and Reddit got really excited about a Doge, a dog here, and an associated currency. A lot of people centered around for tipping. I think I'm a Dogecoin millionaire. Unfortunately, that means I only have like about 200 euro, so not all that much. But that showed that there was a lot of interesting potential for this technology in terms of tipping, micropayments, and the 402 payment not found vision for the web. Here we have a project that I'm involved in lately. It is called the Lightning Network for Bitcoin. What it does is it enables trustless, nearly instantaneous transactions using the Bitcoin network. So the way Bitcoin works right now is that you need at least 10 minutes for one block to clear, and that's called the confirmation time. So it does take 10 minutes to send. This technology can enable small values to be sent instantaneously in a trustless way. So there's no risk of somebody along the way stealing it. And it treats the Bitcoin and digital currency kind of like the internet. On the internet, we have packets that move to their kind of destination, and this can do the same for small amounts of money. Google recently announced something called Google Contributor, where instead of seeing ads, you can actually pay Google, and then they'll pay the sites that you visit. Now, in theory, this sounds pretty cool because the whole idea of the internet being focused on ads has led to lots of invasions of privacy, but it's still going through Google and a centralized entity. It's an interesting experiment and step in the right direction, but the vision that I see is one of a decentralized system where anybody can pay content creators and websites as they browse the internet. We also have, as mentioned, this concept of marketplaces. Back in Silicon Valley, where I live, there's this whole idea of like Uber for everything. But this technology can actually enable decentralized marketplaces, say for something like ride sharing or renting out apartments. Hopefully not as many of the really illegal marketplaces. But we're seeing new technologies emerge around this. Right now, it's still kind of hard to use Bitcoin. But in the long run, what it can do is it can take out the men, like the Ubers that are, Uber's right now worth $50 billion, I think, and it doesn't need to be this way. What if we took that $50 billion and gave it back to the participants of the network? And this technology has the potential to do so. It also can be used to verify, for example, people are using it to verify if pharmaceuticals are actually the right drugs, or property titles, so that there isn't fraud. So this technology can be used for anti-fraud. So in the end, right now, we're seeing a lot of excitement around blockchain technology. Clearly, I'm excited as well. It may not be for everything. Apparently, some guy wants to put his dog on the blockchain. But there's so much potential for a new decentralized internet. And here we have, I took this image from the DOKU site. I thought this represented the vision of the web and the internet that we had in the 90s, and we now have a new chance in order to do so. Thank you very much.